Hey designers, this is Kristen from Cut File Classroom, where I teach you how to design and sell SVG cut files for Cricut, Silhouette, and other cutting machines. In this video, I'm showing you how to make some basic Bow SVG files, which are great for Valentine's Day designs, coquette style designs, or anytime you want to add a feminine touch to your projects. If you want to follow along, I'll put a link below where you can download this free Illustrator practice file, which includes these finished bow designs and the working versions I used to create them. First, I'll move these bows over to the side so I have room on my artboard. I'm going to start with this thinner style bow, and to do that, I'm going to press the L key on my keyboard, and that brings up the ellipse tool. You can also find the ellipse tool over here in the toolbar on the left. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit, and then I'm going to click and drag to the right to make a skinny oval shape. And now I'm going to press Shift C on my keyboard to bring up the Convert Anchor Point tool, which can also be found here underneath the pen tool in the toolbar. So once I have the Convert Anchor Point tool selected, I'm going to click on this one end point of the oval to convert that into a corner point. And now we start to see like a teardrop shape forming. And to smooth that out a bit, I'm just going to use the direct selection tool to click and drag to select these two middle anchor points. And I'm just going to drag these over to the right to kind of give that a smoother teardrop shape. And now I'm just using the selection tool, and I kind of want to squish this shape more so it's a little less elongated, and I think I like that shape there. Next, I'm going to press Shift X on my keyboard to swap the stroke and the fill. And another way you could do that is coming down to the toolbar here and clicking this little arrow to swap the stroke and the fill. So now we have a pink stroke line that is creating our teardrop shape, and I'm just going to thicken up this stroke line, and I'm going to come to the stroke panel, and I'm going to increase that stroke weight to about 20 points. And now we can start to see the loop of our bow forming. Now I'm going to press P on my keyboard to bring up the pen tool to draw the remaining hanging ribbon of my bow. And to do that, I'm going to click close to the corner of this loop, and I'm just going to click and drag slightly down and to the right. And then I'm going to come down a little bit, and I'm going to click and drag slightly down and to the right again. And that's going to create a path that has a slight wave to it to form the hanging part of my bow. Now I can kind of drag this end point around, and I can click these direction handles to tweak the shape of this piece of ribbon here to make it flow a little more freely or however I want. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. So now we can kind of start to see one half of our bow starting to take shape. And what we're going to do is we're going to reflect a copy to create the other half. But before we do that, I'm going to use the width tool to add a bit of variation to these stroke widths and make our bow look a little more interesting and a little bit more like it's made from a ribbon or something. So I'm going to come over to the toolbar, and I'm going to grab the width tool. And with the width tool selected, I'm going to come over to the curved part of this loop, and I'm just going to click and drag outward, and we can kind of see a preview of how much wider that path is going to get. So when I release, we can see what that looks like, and we can see that we've already got a little bit of variation here added to our bow. So now I'm going to do the same thing on this hanging piece here. This time I'm going to come to the end of the path, and I'm going to click and drag from the center outward to make this piece a little bit wider as well. So now we can kind of start to see our bow taking shape. And so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to select this half of the bow, and I'm going to reflect a copy over on the other side. And to do that, I like to use the reflect tool, which is O on my keyboard. You can also find the reflect tool here in the toolbar. So with the reflect tool selected, you can just click at where you want the center of your bow to be. And if you pretend that this is like a straight line creating a vertical axis here, I'm just going to click where the center is, and then I'm going to press Alt and Shift to make a copy. just below that first point where I clicked. So I'm pretending that there's like an invisible straight line here. You could, let me undo that. You could also put an actual guideline there for you to use to reflect while you get the hang of doing this. So to create a guideline, you want to make sure your rulers are visible on your screen. If not, you can come up to View, Rulers, Show Rulers, and then you can drag a guideline out from the left side ruler. Okay, so once you have your guideline set up, you can click and select the bow and pressing O to grab the reflect tool. And again, I'm clicking in the center to set that point of reflection there. Then I'm going to press Alt and Shift as I click a little further down on this line, and that's going to reflect over that axis line. So now we have our bow that's reflected. We can start to see how it's going to look. If you want, you can kind of tweak the ends separately to make it just look a little more organic, so it's not quite so symmetrical on both sides. You can kind of tug one side in a little bit. You can, tweak some of these anchor points to just give it a little bit of a variation so it's not quite so symmetrical and looks a little bit more organic. Once you're happy with the way your bow looks, you can create the center for it. So for this bow, I'm just going to use a simple circle. So I'm pressing the L key on my keyboard to grab the ellipse tool. And I'm just going to press Shift as I click and drag. And right now, this stroke has the same width setting as the rest of my bow. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Shift X. And that's going to swap the stroke and fill. So now I just have a circle with a fill and no stroke. And then once I get my circle established, I can place it right there in the middle of my bow. So now I don't really need this guideline. I can go ahead and delete it. And now I can go ahead and expand these paths so that this becomes a shape that a cutting machine could follow. So before I expand anything, I'm just going to make a copy of the shape over to the side. I'm pressing Alt on my keyboard to drag and make a copy, just in case I want to come back and make other variations or edits from this version of the bow. So now that I've done that, I'm going to select these paths, and I'm going to come up to Object, Path, Outline, Stroke, and that's going to convert those paths into outlines. So now these are actual vector shapes that a cutting machine could follow. So the next step is, because we have all of these overlapping shapes, a cutting machine would just slice these all up into separate shapes, and we don't want that. So what we need to do is unite these. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this center circle because I want to preserve a copy for later, and you'll see why. So I'm just pressing Command or Control C on my keyboard to make a copy of that. So now I'm going to select all of these overlapping shapes, and I'm coming to the Pathfinder panel, and I'm going to click Unite. If you do not have the Pathfinder panel on your screen, you can come up to Windows and just make sure that Pathfinder is checked. So again, in the Pathfinder panel, I'm going to click the Unite icon, and now we can see that all of those overlapping shapes have been combined into a single compound shape. So now what I'm going to do is I still have that circle on my clipboard, and I'm going to press Command or Control F for paste in front, and that puts the circle right back where I had it. And I'm just going to give it a lighter fill color to differentiate it from the rest of the design. So now we have just a little bit of like an accent that kind of helps that part of the bow pop. Okay, so now I'm going to select this bow, and I'm going to right click and choose Group. So now our first bow is complete. Next, I'm going to make this style of bow, which looks like it's made with a wider ribbon. So to do that, I'm going to start with the rectangle tool. I'm going to press M on my keyboard to bring up the rectangle tool. You can also find that here in the tool panel. So I'm just going to click and drag to make a rectangle shape, something like that. And the next thing I want to do is I just want to narrow down one side of this rectangle to make sort of a trapezoid shape. So I'm going to use the direct selection tool to click and drag to select just these 2 points on one side of the rectangle. And I'm going to right click, choose Transform, Scale. And already you can see my settings from last time. I'm using non-uniform I have horizontal set to 100 and I have vertical set to 60. And when we toggle the preview, we can see that it's just shrinking this side of the rectangle. So that's what we want. I kind of want to, let's see how this looks, just slightly bigger number there. And I think I like that. So I'm going to click OK. And then again, I'm just going to drag this in and make this just a bit of a, shorter shape. Let me zoom in here. Okay, so now we have this trapezoid shape, and now this time I'm going to use the direct selection tool to click and drag the other two anchor points. And then I'm going to use these live corner widgets. I'm going to click and drag to make those rounded. So this is up to you, however much you want your corners to be rounded for your bow, but I'm gonna go with something like that. And from here, I'm gonna press Shift C to bring up the Convert Anchor Point tool. And then you can just kind of click and drag on these anchor points here to kind of give them a smoother curve. You can adjust them up a little more. I probably should have stayed with that 60% because I want this a little more narrow at the center of my bow. So I'm just selecting these anchor points individually and using the arrow keys to nudge them in. So once you get that bow shape the way you like, the next thing we can do is add the cutout for the top of this bow. To do that, I'm going to press the L key on my keyboard to bring up the ellipse tool, and I'm going to draw a very narrow oval up here, and I'm going to change that to a white fill color, and then I'm going to drag it on top of my bow shape. And I'm going to press Shift C on my keyboard to grab the Convert Anchor Point tool again, and just click on one of those end points of my oval to bring this to a point. And then I'm going to select these two middle anchor points and just drag them to the right to kind of smooth out that teardrop shape. And then I'm going to press R on my keyboard to bring up the Rotate tool, which is also located here in the tool panel. And I'm going to click right at the point of the teardrop shape to set that as the point of rotation. And then I'm just going to click and drag the other side up a little bit so it matches this angle of my bow. Now this loop is a little large right now, so I'm going to use the selection tool and just click the center of that and drag it inward so it fits that shape a little bit better. And then I'm just going to tweak. I want this to be a little more curved. I don't see a direction handle coming out of this end of the anchor point. So what I can do is I can, using the direct selection tool, I can click on this path and drag it out just a little bit. And as I drag it out, you can see a direction handle has now appeared. So now I can grab that handle and I can kind of tweak this curve a little bit more to my liking. So I like the way that looks, and I actually kind of want to drag this down a little bit, and there we go. Okay, so I'm starting to like the way that this bow looks, and now I can create the little ribbon tail here. So again, I'm going to use the pen tool to do that. I'm going to press P on my keyboard to bring up the pen tool, and I'm going to click and drag a little bit down and to the right again, and this time I want it to be a little bit of an arc shape. So I'm just going to click and drag downward. And now we have a very skinny path, so I'm going to go ahead and make that thicker. So I'm going to come to the stroke panel and let's try 60 point, and that's probably too big. So let's try 40 point, and that's much better. So now I can use the direct selection tool to kind of tweak these endpoints to get this hanging ribbon piece to look the way that I want it to look. So once we get there, we can once again use the width tool to adjust this ribbon piece the way that we would like it. So I'm going to grab the width tool and I'm just going to hover over the center end point of this path, and I'm going to click and drag away from the center to widen this path. And once I do that, I can continue to adjust this and get it the way I like it. So I think that looks good for now. Now I'm ready to reflect a copy over to create the other half. So once again, I'm going to drag out a center guideline to use while I reflect, and I'm going to select both of these pieces and press O on my keyboard to bring up the reflect tool. Then I'm going to click on that center line, press Alt and Shift, and click again further down on that center line. So that gives me a copy of my bow, and I think this looks a little weird as is, so I'm just going to grab these loop parts and just space them out a little bit, and let me tweak this just a little more until I get my ribbon the way that I want it. Again, we don't necessarily want it to be super symmetrical. That's up to you. You can add a little bit of variation. Let's say I use the width tool and just make this a little more narrow at the top. And let's say we're happy with that. So now I can go ahead and add the center knot of my bow and see how this all is looking. And this time, instead of a circle, I'm going to use a rectangle to start with to create my knot. So I'm going to press the M key on my keyboard, and I'm just going to click and drag and draw a rectangle. And now this looks super funky because it has the same stroke width settings as this ribbon tail. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Shift X to swap that fill and stroke. And now I have a regular rectangle, and I'm just going to place that over the center of my bow. And as I'm doing this, I can kind of see where these ribbon tails look a little bit off. So I can kind of click and drag those anchor points up so that they are tucked within the knot as they would be in a real bow. And then I can select this rectangle and I can drag on these corner widgets to make this knot a little more rounded, or however. So this is kind of up to you, however you want that center bow to look. And I'm just going to zoom in a bit because I manually nudged those bows before and it kind of threw things off center. So I just want to go ahead and tweak that a bit. Okay, so once you've got the bow the way that you like it, we can go ahead and outline these strokes so they are actual vector shapes. But before we do that, I'm going to make my copy over to the side, and then I can come over here and select these paths and click Object, Path, Outline, Stroke, and now these have become vector shapes. Now I can add a little cutout at the end of these ribbon tails. Select a tail and then press P to bring up the pen tool and just click to place an anchor point right in the middle of one of those tails. And then I'm just going to use the direct selection tool to click and drag that up. And then I'm going to do the same thing, click to select that shape, press the P to grab the pen tool, click to add an anchor point, and this time I see I have little direction handles here. So if I click and drag up, it's going to give me this curved shape, which you might like, but in this case I want it to be a sharp angle, so I'm going to press Shift C to grab the Convert Anchor Point tool and click right on that to convert it to a corner point. So now my bow is starting to look pretty good, and the next thing I need to do is combine all of these overlapping shapes. Oh, actually, before I do that, I almost forgot that these ovals here are just white shapes. They aren't actually cut outs yet. So I need to cut these out from the ribbon loop shapes, and I'm going to stay over here on the side so we can see this better. But I'm going to select this teardrop shape, and I'm going to select the bow, and I'm coming to the Pathfinder panel, and I'm going to click Subtract. I want to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to click Subtract. So there we go. So now we have a complete cutout of that shape. So now I can bring this back over here. And now we are ready to combine these overlapping shapes to create our cuttable bow. Just like I did with the other design, I'm going to select this rectangle shape first and press Command or Control C to make a copy on my clipboard. And then I'm going to select all of these shapes and click Unite in the Pathfinder panel. And then I'm going to press Command or Control F to paste that knot back in place right where it was. And then I'm going to give this a different fill color so it can stand out. And now I can select this shape and I can right click and group it. Okay, so now that's our second bow done. So next I'm going to create this style bow, which we can see has some cutouts to create some definition between the knot, the loops, and the ribbon tails. So to do that, I'm going to come over to my working copy, and I'm going to press Alt as I click and drag to bring that copy here onto my artboard. And first I'm going to, here I'll make these a different color so we can see, I'm going to subtract these out from the loop shapes. So I'm just selecting both of these shapes and clicking subtract in the Pathfinder panel. And the next thing we need to do is create outlines from these paths. So object, path, outline stroke, and again, I'm gonna create these little flag cutouts here. There we go. Okay. So now the next thing I'm going to do is create offsets on these top shapes, both of these loops and the center bow. So I'm going to come to Object, Path, Offset Path, and you can see here I have the offset set to 0.08. I have the joins set to round, and we can toggle the preview to see what that does, and that creates an offset around those shapes that I selected. And then I'm just going to change the color of that offset so we can see it better. And then I'm just going to select these two ribbon tails, right click, and I'm going to send them to the back so that they're behind the rest of the shapes. So now we can select our full bow, and I'm going to come to the Pathfinder panel and click trim, and that's going to basically slices into all those shapes. It combines the shapes that are overlapping. Now I can get rid of all of these offsets, and to do that quickly I'm going to press Y to grab the magic wand tool, which you can also find up here on the toolbar, and I'm just going to double click on this magic wand so you can see my settings. I have fill color checked and I have my tolerance set to 1. And then I'm going to come in here and click on this green color, and that's going to select all of that green color for me without me having to manually select each shape. And then I'm just going to press delete on my keyboard, and that leaves me with my beautiful bow shape. And then I actually have some hidden ghost paths in here that were created when I used the trim function, so you just want to be careful for that, and pressing Command or Control Y to switch into outline view is really helpful for catching those hidden invisible paths like that. Okay, so now that is our last bow. So the last step we need to do here is to make a compound path out of this so that this bow cuts as a single shape in Cricut Design Space. So I'm going to come up to Object, Compound Path, Make, and now this bow is ready to go. Okay, so now we have all 3 of our bows, and let me just make these a little bit bigger. So now we have all 3 of our bows that are cut file ready and can be saved as SVGs to load into our Cricut or Silhouette cutting machines. So if you'd like to learn more about designing SVG files for cutting machines, head over to cutfileclassroom.com and download my free designer's guide to error-free SVGs. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and feel free to drop any questions in the comments below. I also want to hear what you would like to see next, so let me know in the comments and I might just make a video on it. Thanks again. See you next time. If you'd like to learn more about designing SVG files for cutting machines, head over to cutfileclassroom.com and download my free designer's guide to error-free SVGs. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and feel free to drop any questions in the comments below. I also want to hear what you'd like to see next, so let me know in the comments and I might just make a video from it. Thanks again. See you next time.